Welcome, everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Welcome to Let's Talk AI. My name is Thomas. I'm the host. And today I have the pleasure to be with Lucía Tróchez Ardila. Lucia, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the invitation to this podcast. I'm excited about it.
And so am I. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. I have so many questions to ask. I always like to ask at first, um, can you describe yourself in a few words, in a few sentences for the audience? It can be a personal and professional introduction.
Okay. So I would describe myself as a Colombian empowered woman living in Mexico and working in the national and international tech world. Um, I would also describe myself as a leader that trusts her team and wants the best for them. And in the personal life, I think a good friend, uh, a wife, and a soon to be mom.
Wow, congratulations on that. Super happy. This is a very impressive description. My second question generally is what are you trying to achieve? Uh, and I feel like you might have a few words to say about that, but Lucia, what are you trying to achieve today?
Today, or like in general.
Like in general, but
Okay. Um,
today, yeah.
yeah, I think one of the objectives in my life has
Yeah.
been um, to strive to have an impact. And
Hmm.
I think right now I am striving to design and deploy projects and programs that have a social impact through public policy. Um, and I also want more individuals to care about great causes and do something about it, not just care about them and say, like, oh, yeah, I care about the environment. Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
care about, um, like there's no more corruption. But what are you doing about it in your day to day?
Yeah, exactly. And this is so you mentioned public policy, right?
Yeah.
And maybe for the listeners, because when I first met Christina through the episode, I learned a lot of new terms, and like I learned a lot about regulations and what you are trying to do at PIT Policy Lab. So, can you maybe uh, shortly introduce people to public policy?
Yeah. I mean, what we do at the Pit Policy Lab is we try and succeed on generating projects that are multi sector.
Hmm.
Um, and what we want to do is make sure that governments have a more effective way of making policy, right?
Okay.
So, public policy in general refers to the act and the fact that governments create programs towards social impact so that people that live in different countries, localities, municipalities, etc., have a better life. And what we want to do is do that through technology and making sure that there is a collaboration between different sectors. So, not only um, working with the government, but working with different companies, different academia institutions, and different um, social impact
Mm.
organizations as well.
I see. Well, thanks for this introduction. And so you mentioned PID Policy Lab, so I will ask you again, but can you take us briefly through your career and your journey, just so that we get a glimpse of what is your background and how did you evolve through your career?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the fact that, again, I'm Colombian. So I studied in Bogota. I
Okay.
studied multimedia engineering
Hmm.
at the Military University of Colombia, and then used that to expand my view of what was possible, looking beyond programming and video games, which was a lot of the career focus.
Yeah.
So I became the national manager of communications for ISEC in Mexico, and then ISEC in the United States the year after that. And what I did, well, basically, ISEC is a nonprofit organization that focuses on development, youth development, and international exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot about the challenges of working in a different country that wasn't mine, a lot of cultural exchange as well. And I just became in love with traveling and making sure that I knew different perspectives and different people. Then after that, I became the international marketing manager for Techstars, which is a company that focuses on acceleration for startups. And I was working at that time with over 100 countries, managing the brands for the early stages programs, which are called Startup Weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I think that I jumped into a little bit more of that impact, of that public impact that I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about. I worked at an action tank called Sea Minds as director of programs. And I could really start then designing and implementing impact projects that were multisectorial, that were multi actor, and that were very complex. So I think that's where my career really stepped up. I was part of the leadership team there, and I got to have a say on strategic decisions, where I also learned how to navigate gracefully the management of projects as a young but experienced already woman in a very men tilted industry, which is the tech world.
Mm.
And now, as part of the PIT Policy Lab, I'm the general manager here, and I am strengthening all the skills that I have learned throughout my career, and still looking forward to continue that deep impact on society and my team through the work that we do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for this amazing retrospective of what you've been doing professionally. So, speaking about PID Policy Lab, um, I would like to ask you about how the organization is working to build collaborative projects across, you mentioned multiple sectors. So could you share maybe some insights about how do you approach this kind of projects?
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned, I'm the general manager there, so I oversee the day-to-day operations and the team. I think our ultimate goal is to ensure that the team members are happy, first of all, and that we're exceeding our clients' expectations. And what I mean by that is that we always try to go above and beyond what the project really is about, to ensure that we have different perspectives again. So, in terms of the multi sector collaborations, we usually have a main partner that we collaborate with. So, this may be
Okay.
again government or academia or another social organization.
Yes.
And what we can, what or being part of a consortium of different parts, the technical and the social aspect.
Hmm.
And then what we do is that we have done several projects now where we have realized that working in this kind of multi-sectorial collaboration is hard. It's very hard because you need to coordinate with different types of people, different types of stakeholders, but it's the best way to achieve impact. And especially in the public sector, where if you don't have the information about, for example, like a problem you're trying to solve, and you don't have a technical team for it, and you don't have the right knowledge for it, then the problem might be solved on the surface, but not on
Hmm.
the deeper end.
Hmm.
So that, I think that's how we're building to
Mm.
collaborate projects.
That's super interesting. And for the people who are listening right now, no worries. We're going to get into like specific examples of a project, multi-sector project, uh, like you mentioned me some crazy examples, and so we'll be able to understand it further. Um, so before getting into some examples. This is funny how you have an experience where you've done project both regionally and globally. I wanted to ask you, what role do you believe AI can play in solving some of the biggest social problems we face today, and how can we ensure that it is used responsibly?
Um, so I believe that the use of AI systems is a tool to help us solve some of those biggest social problems, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So, for example, in the education sector, if we're talking about the abandonment of school, especially in countries that have low income,
mm-hmm.
um, Latin America, as a region, must have some of the worst permanence rates of in rural schools, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, using the system, the AI system, to identify what the plausible causes are or what the problems are for those students to remain at the school are, and then prevent that from happening through different strategies, not necessarily
Yeah.
through AI, but AI helps us identify that, is a great way of using the technology. And of course, as you mentioned, it is important that we understand how to use it responsibly. But I think that right now there are several frameworks at the international and national and regional level that can be adapted to any project.
Mm.
So there shouldn't be a question of how to, but rather if we're implementing them or not. So I believe there is no excuse to say we're not using AI responsibly. I think that we should just do the work and implement those frameworks already existing or create new ones if you have the time and the team to do it, but making sure that you are considering privacy, security, and transparency, any other aspect from the technology that might be a risk towards that population or towards the government institution or towards the academic institution. Like it depends on the type of project, but I think that it's very possible and very doable right now.
Hmm. Well, thanks. That gives some insights, and you mentioned a lot of industries, and so this might be also an interesting part in working in this kind of projects. And working at Bid Policy Lab, you might be working with governments and working. You mentioned education. In our first call, you mentioned working on the health or environment sustainability projects. Regarding those two fields, health and environment. You've told me before we shared today on this podcast. You've shared with me some experiences, and I would like to get back on them. But first of all, speaking of health and environmental sustainability, we could include education to make it more interesting. But how do you see? What do you see as the most exciting opportunities for AI in those areas? Um, yeah, that would be my question.
um I think there are so many, and especially I'm sure you've
Very
heard.
wide question.
Yeah, it's very wide, and I think there are so many. For example, in environmental, specifically from designing more efficient energy buildings, right? And that could be one. Monitoring deforestation or monitoring species specifically to track the health of an ecosystem. Optimizing renewable energy deployments, making sure, for example, in health, right? Um, there is like how hospitals are working right now in making sure that patients' information is getting gathered. So previously you would have to do this manually all the time, and now you have more statistics and more data that is being gathered so that you can make better decisions or support decisions as for a doctor, for a nurse, for a person that works in a hospital. And I think in education, again, many opportunities as well. um but yeah, some of them are like understanding causes of school abandonment,
Hmm.
understanding, for example, like what kind of topics are more interesting to students and how you can change curriculums based on that, and making sure that you are actually educating for the future and not because something was part of a framework before that worked 50 years ago or 100 years ago, right? Education has changed so much in the past years, especially since the pandemic as well. Like hybrid education and making sure that we are understanding what are the topics of the future and what skills young people need to learn to be able to thrive in their life. So I think those might be some of the ones that I'm excited about.
Well, that's fascinating. I want to ask you about healthcare, but first of all, I would like to know about if you have more insights, for example, on the education field. Like you mentioned, the future like courses that we will teach that will be fundamental for the education of a child. Can you share more about these? Like how like first of all, do you work with any project related with education right now?
Yeah, so we're actually doing a project that's called Equitable AI. Well, that was
Uh-huh.
part of a call called Equitable AI. We're part of a consortium. And in this project, what we're doing is actually implementing an AI system in Guanajuato, Mexico, so that we can understand the causes of school abandonment. And understanding those causes will make sure to inform the professors and the directors of schools of what could be the strategies so that these kids remain. So the objective is not school abandonment, the objective is permanence, right?
Mm,
But through the analysis of the causes of school abandonment. And
mm,
it's a very wide topic as well, because it might be that there is different nodes of information that come from different settings, socially, economically,
yeah.
technically, etc. But I think that's one of the projects that we're most excited about. We're gonna be releasing a report, a recommendations report on specifically a guide, an ethical AI checklist, so that more schools around the country could implement, and around the world could implement that system, and ensuring that they know the actual causes of school abandonment to create those strategies for permanence.
Mm. Wow, that's super interesting. Uh, that's very interesting, and I remember in your first call you mentioned a project about healthcare, and just before in the episode you mentioned um, like how do you use uh, those projects to measure things to take action, and because a lot of the time we talk about the analysis part and like building the report and then but then what happens when we have all the study, like how do we act, right? And
Yeah,
so can you introduce us to the listeners about the healthcare project that you mentioned
yeah.
and how you went from the research, like building models and understanding, to like the action, and like how do you measure the action, which is a very interesting part, I feel.
Yeah. So I think that exactly that's it, right? So there are different stages of how to implement an AI project successfully, and I think that this healthcare project was done under the FAIR initiative from the IADB, which is the Inter-American Development Bank. It was done in conjunction with the Tec de Monterrey, which is a university here in Mexico, the government of Jalisco, and Sea Mines, which is where I used to work before. And it was to solve not solve the problem, but understanding the causes of a chronic and progressive disease and condition that is called diabetic retinopathy. This disease is is caused by diabetes, and diabetes is one of the most chronic normal diseases around the world. But in Mexico specifically, the disease of diabetic retinopathy has is one of the leading cause of blindness
Hmm.
and loss of sight. So what we wanted to do was create a screening program at the first level of health. So when you first go to the doctor to, if you know you have diabetes, the patients would be able to undergo a visual review, basically, and a computer system would transfer the iFunds, which is the exam that is done in that specifically, the photographs of that to the diabetic retinopathy graduation department. So that way, the AI system would assist the doctors in determining what were the possibilities of this person having that disease and what stage the disease was in order to transfer those cases to a specific hospital or to a specific treatment. So there's a lot of challenges that we identified through the actual implementation of this project. I think that, of course, you need to consider resources, human resources, technical resources, the fact that people understand that an AI system is being used to treat them. But we had really good results from the first pilot. Over 1,000 patients in the state of Jalisco were treated in five health centers. And this also resulted in a policy report and in a governance framework, because there's a lot of like legal stuff that pertains the health data of people, that is still to be public. This project ends on July this year. So this will be published in July. And I think that the most interesting part about this project is that the multi sector collaboration really helped in understanding what the different pieces were needed um, to make it successful, right?
Hmm.
So the next step would be for this policy to be implemented by the government, and then for more people to be part of the data sets that are training the algorithm, etc., so that we could have like a full rollout of the program.
Hmm. Oh, that's super interesting. And when you say, for example, all right, let's say like the regulation pass,
Yes.
and now you can deploy and have more data to choose a model. What about the like the workforce, like the people who are treating the patient, and like how do you scale both? Well, I want to make an hybrid question here. So you mentioned like the cross the cross the multiple sectors, and like how you bring everything together. So I would like to hear more about that. But most of all, how do you scale like from a project like that? Once you have the study, you have the numbers, you've done everything, and the governments approve it, how do
Yeah.
you scale it like technically? I mean,
Yeah.
technically, I would assume like you just have more data and you make data scientist works. But most of all, how do you implement increase the workforce?
Yeah, I think that that's such a good question, because there cannot be one without the other. So you cannot implement an AI system without actually building the capacity for the government officials that are running the program, the doctors that are implementing the exam, and the people that are getting a support. So the same doctors that are getting the support from the system or the information from the system. There is always a confirmation from a human person, from a doctor, right? So it's not like if you go to that exam, the system will tell you, oh yeah, you have diabetic retinopathy stage 2, right? You're going to believe that system. No, the system always turns the information towards the doctor makes a confirmation, and the doctor is the one that talks to the patient. So I think that it's very important for us to build out those capacity and those skills within the sector itself. So if we're talking about health, specifically in this project, or we're talking about education with the directors of the schools or the teachers, etc., it doesn't work on its own as an AI system that is solving the problem. Again, as I mentioned, is a tool to help aid in the efficiency of the problem solving instead of just being the problem solver.
Hmm. Very interesting. And how do you explain people? um because I feel like medical decisions and affirmations for someone that is not familiar with AI, when
Yeah.
you tell them, okay, so we have an AI model that detected that you might have a probability of whatever to have this disease phase two, how do you deal with making clear that people like those are recommended model, but you have also doctors that are behind? So how do you
Yeah.
explain it to people?
So, what we did for this pilot specifically was that people were given a manual of what was going to happen if they wanted, if they had diabetes, they could do the exam for free, and they would receive this information about how the AI system worked, what the AI system's recommendation would probably be. So you have 0% chance to 100% chance or whatever in these types of levels, but a doctor is going to be like receiving that information and confirming that information from the exam. So the people understood and knew that information previous to the performance of the exam. So it was never done without their consent. They always consented to, yes, take the photograph of my eye. Yes, I'm agreeing that I understand that this is being run through a system. This data is going to be collected for this amount of time, and I'm giving the consent of that, right? So I think that making sure that the people are informed and that they understand, again, is this in the public sector is the same as in the entertainment sector, right? You need to
Hmm.
understand that Netflix gives you some options. If you saw an action movie and Netflix is giving you action movies to see because that's what you like, you probably understand that that's what's happening, right? And they tell you in the terms and conditions that that's happening. Or if you're using Facebook, the ads that are relevant to you are being done by an AI system, right? So you get those notifications from Facebook now that you are getting those ads because you liked whatever other ad. So I think that's one of the most important parts, as well as you mentioned, that people understand. And yes, it's a challenge because most people are not tech savvy. Most people don't know what the consequences or what the risks of the AI systems are. So that's why we try to do it very responsibly, understanding what non disclosure agreements we need to do and sign, what kind of data we're collecting, how long we're collecting it for, what kind of privacy frameworks we're using, how transparent we are with the information we're generating with the algorithm, etc.
Wow, that's fascinating. And regarding retaining data of people, I was thinking before you mentioned, all right, next step, regulation moves on, and then you can grow the model, grow the project. But you mentioned this retaining the data, and
Yeah.
so how do you grow a model when some data is going to be um, like you're going to delete some data, or do you like do you like sanitize the data and then you don't know it's from that person but you keep using it in the model, or what
Yeah,
is
so the data is always anonymized. Like that's the correct way of labeling data. It's always anonymous, and you don't know which patient that photograph is from. What you do know is when you're running that program, you do know that that photograph specifically is with that person. But when you're training the algorithm does not know or does not identify as, it doesn't connect a person to a specific
of course,
photograph,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So it depends on the data sets and how you're doing it. But I think it's very important, right, to understand how long we're keeping the data for. If we're only keeping the data to train the system, but we're anonymizing it and making sure that the data is clean, we're making sure that the data is safe and secure, then shouldn't be a problem. And people can always say, like, you know what, I don't want you to use my picture anymore, so we would remove that picture from the data set.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you for sharing all these details. It is very interesting. You have you have an extensive experience leading both regional and global programs. I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between those two types of programs?
uh, this is also such a good question. I think that one key aspect, or something that plays like a very important role, is cultural aspects
Okay.
and local context,
Okay.
right? So it depends on whether you're running again a regional or a global program. You need to understand the differences culturally between a region, which might
Mhm.
have up to 20, 25 countries, and global, which is like the whole part of the regions and all of those nuances that come with that. So, for example, when I used to run global projects and global programs, always ensuring the participation of at least 1 to 2 people of each region in the weekly meetings or in the follow-up meetings for a project, that would help, so that the representation was there of understanding what they needed, how they needed it, and how it would be implemented for that region specifically, and just making sure that your program has those levels of implementation, right? And again, for the regional part, if in a regional program you have countries that are more advanced in a topic and others that are less advanced in a topic, you need to create 2 different sets of information for
Mm,
those 2 different types of audiences.
mm,
So I think that those are the biggest differences between global and regional. Um, and I think that one of the best ways of ensuring that you're being successful is just talking to people, right? Becoming more human, getting feedback from them. Hey, what could have we done better in the last iteration of this program? And what do you think we need to implement? Also, in terms of global, one of the main challenges that I ran into was translation of resources.
mm,
There's a lot of resources in English, and there is a lot of resources in that are probably not for everyone, because not everyone speaks that language. So making sure that you are representing as well that regional perspective through language translation is important.
mm. Awesome. Well, thanks for enlightening those two differences. So you mentioned these two differences between regional and global projects. And one thing that you mentioned through stating the differences is getting feedback. And I
Yep.
feel like this is such an important thing. Like you mentioned before in the first project, like in the healthcare project, like how do you measure your actions and how do you measure like how the AI model is performing and how do you define these KPIs and all of that? And I feel like when when we try to add value, we need to understand how we're going to measure the value that we are going to analyze, and like how do you measure that? And so I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned also that it was a challenge to get feedbacks, and I feel like, for example, if I develop an application tomorrow that does a specific thing, it is a tricky way. It is hard to get feedback because the users will never say, or patient or a group of people will never say what they need because they might not know it. So
Yep.
how do you approach a group of people to get great feedback? Like, what do you have frameworks or do you have some vision to share regarding that?
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of techniques to get feedback, starting from the basic one, which is surveys, right? Like you send out and you approach your customer. That's one. You can also do focus groups where you ask specific questions to that group of people that was served with that product or that service. Then you also create like a chatbot or a communication channel for that person to give you feedback whenever they want to. But I also think that in terms of feedback, like you need to understand what you're trying to get feedback on, right? If you create a product or a service that is regarding a specific thing and you want feedback on A, but people are giving you feedback on C, then is not what you need to understand. So I think that first of all, understanding what kind of feedback you need for your system to work properly, for that person to understand what's happening, or for that product to be able to be of actual value to that person, that is the first step. And then after that, implementing the strategies and the techniques to gather that feedback,
Hmm.
and making sure that you're analyzing that feedback and reiterating on the project.
Hmm.
So not leaving it there like, oh, they told us that it sucked, right? For example. And well, it sucked, but we're still running it as it is. Like, no, it sucked. Why did it? Why was it bad? What do you think could be improved? What would you have liked to seen that you didn't, or whatever questions you might ask, and then retraining your system or redoing your product or service, right?
Hmm. Do you sometimes find that some specific people will give very great feedbacks, and so you will focus more on the minority because you know those are quality feedbacks and it makes sense with your vision, and you can measure then the impact of their feedbacks based on how you're going to evolve? Or do you think that regarding feedbacks we need to keep it very diverse and homogeneous and mixing a lot of visions and a lot of profiles?
Yeah, I think that it definitely needs to be very diverse. I think that you have to go the extra step as a project manager or as a project in general to
Hmm.
ensure that you are receiving different kinds of feedback from different kinds of people. So if
Hmm.
you're serving people that are different races, ethnicities, religions, or whatever your project is about, you need to consider all of them, right?
Hmm.
And especially now with underrepresented groups, you need to consider that to balance your data. Because if you're, as you say, you're always receiving great feedback from, let's say, men, and women are not being considered, then you're going to be creating products that are mostly focused on men. And
Hmm.
unless that's your vision,
Hmm.
then you should be working like even harder to get that feedback from the other
Hmm.
portion of your audience.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like this is so important because diversity and being inclusive might be challenging sometimes because of like cultural differences, but in the midterm, long term, it becomes very enlightening on, all right, we struggled a bit because we have cultural differences. And so we needed to give it more time to be aligned on some thoughts or visions. But in the long term, what you're building is global and it works for more people.
Yeah.
And so this is something I've learned through like previous podcasts with some people. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think definitely the globalization, and right now, like, any product or service can be global, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if you decided that that's going to be the case, you need to understand how to incorporate a diverse set of information, a diverse set of feedback, a diverse set um, of yeah, of like users and user experience to make sure that you are serving all of your audience. Otherwise, you're just, again, you're just serving them like a little bit.
I see. In our first call, you mentioned a very, very interesting project that I love to hear, and also I love to understood like how can this data enable and enhance so many other uh, KPIs that we could not think at first. I'm talking about the Jaguars case that you've been working on. Can you explain to the audience, to the people who are listening, about what you've done, and then what are the implementations of those information further on?
Yeah, of course. So this project you're talking about is called Tech for Nature Mexico.
I'm
This
sorry,
is,
I call it the
yeah,
Jaguar project.
yeah, and this is for AI for Climate's first living lab. What we did was that um, we designed a project for mangrove and jaguar conservation in the state of Yucatan, Mexico. And this was harnessing community based approaches, intersector collaborations, and AI systems to analyze and monitor both ecosystems' health and the jaguar monitoring for its conservation. So this was done through the deployment of camera traps, and where thousands of pictures were taken through these camera traps to make the data sets, and then the creation of an algorithm, of a pattern recognition algorithm, to understand how many jaguars were moving from that corridor. And then we also implemented sound monitoring devices to understand the system, the ecosystem's health through sound. So I think that this project, this project still going on. Is not finished yet. I still It has still until December this year, if I'm not mistaken. And this project specifically, what wants to do is understanding, because the jaguar is an umbrella species, which means that if the jaguar is safe, or if there is the presence of jaguars, then other species and the ecosystem will thrive, right? So this includes a specific kind of pig, which in English I don't know the name, but in Spanish, yes. This includes a lot of bird in the ecosystem, crocodiles, and other species that are running through that specific corridor. It's a natural reserve. And what we wanted to understand was how many jaguars there were through that pattern recognition system. So imagine the jaguars have in their spots, it's like fingerprints. The Each jaguar has a specific set of spots, and not any jaguar is the same as another. So at first, I think 5 jaguars were sighted through the camera traps, and then also understanding, like for example, if people are hunting this species in the area through the sound monitoring, how to prevent that, right? So it will help. This project will help the government make better decisions, and the park rangers make better decisions and faster decisions, more efficient decisions on how to take care of this species to ensure that the ecosystem continues thriving throughout the years.
Wow, this is fascinating. I love how it combines both image, images and sounds, and
Yeah.
how
I mean, it's two different
this,
systems. Don't believe that is one AI system. No, it's two different AI systems.
of course.
But what we're doing is that we're collecting the information from the pattern recognition AI system, plus adding that to the sound monitoring ecosystem, and then we make decisions based on that, right?
Yeah, and what I found fascinating is that we often see like a deep learning case where it's just about video or image, and another one that it will just be about sound. But this really combines, and it really shows how powerful combined it can be, because then you can make correlations between what's going on
Yep.
through the movements of the jaguars, and you can also detect like uncommon patterns that you're like,
Yep.
why did that happen? That doesn't make sense because we didn't see that on this specific model, but this happened there. So why? And this is fascinating. And do you have KPIs? Like, do you have other measures? Like, what kind of impact besides hunting and taking fast decisions? Do you have other KPIs that monitoring those animals and the activity of the animal in the region can enhance and add value?
Yeah. So again, as I said, it's mangroves and jaguar conservation.
Oh,
Mangroves are one of the most important part between the ocean and land, specifically in the coast of Yucatan,
hmm,
very other many coasts in South America and Europe, etc. Because this ecosystem, what it does is that it oxygenates Earth, first of all. So if if there is a lot of human activity in the mangrove ecosystem, the
hmm,
ecosystem will start to die, and then the mangrove ecosystem provides as well the food and water resources to the smaller species from this chain that
mm,
the jaguar feeds from.
mm,
So when we're protecting that, when we're understanding how to conserve better those areas and that species specifically, that is the umbrella species, we understand how to protect the area of the mangrove, which also includes like beach erosion. It includes yeah, just a bunch of other like KPIs that are important for the health of that specific zone, and that can be replicated. I mean, the idea of doing this pilot project was that
Hmm.
we want to replicate a framework that works for not only this mangrove in Yucatan, but also other mangroves in Colombia, for example, that has a very deep mangrove ecosystem. Brazil, that also has one. And then in Europe, there are several countries that have it. So just making sure that we are implementing frameworks that can be escalated and that can be useful for other ecosystems as well, to ensure that we're protecting more of that, and conserving more of that nature based
Hmm. Yeah, and
project.
I love how monitoring those two species plus the sounds, it really allows to control the entire
Yeah,
ecosystem of the zone. This is very impressive because
it's
just when hearing the project, you're just like, oh, but what about the other animals? Or okay,
yeah.
but this is cool, but like, why? But when you understand it in a better way, you understand that doing these specific actions and using audio and photos, videos. I'm not sure what it is, but
It's both. It's both.
both.
But it,
Wow.
yes, it trickles down. It trickles down into like a lot of other actions that can be taken towards that conservation. And I don't know if you've seen a couple of years ago, or maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a video that was presented by Yellowstone, the park, on how they reintroduce foxes
Hmm.
or wolves into an environment of the park, and that made the ecosystem like be reborn. The ecosystem was dead, and then when they reintroduced these animals, like the specific species, the ecosystem was just like completely changed because
Wow.
of how that species moves the ecosystem, right? Because you're running from wolves, but you have to like move. For example, I don't know, I'm gonna make it up, you can look the video up. But it was just like, yeah, if the wolves are hunting rabbits, for example, or another species, the rabbits have to move, so they move not only food, but they move like other things, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. So I think that that's the important
Wow.
part of understanding. And again, I'm not a biologist. I'm one of the people in my team.
Yeah.
Great, she's a great biologist, so she understood all of this, and she was the one that made us craft the
Hmm.
technological and social aspect of it. And we
Hmm.
also worked, as I said, a very important part of this is that we also worked with the community. So the community that lives there, that is seeing the jaguars live, right? We're putting camera traps, but they're seeing the jaguars passing through their state farms or whatever. So just making sure that they are into the project as well, and they have the buy-in to understand why we're doing this, was important for us.
Wow. And this is, sorry, this is very like the this enhance so much the multi sector that you mentioned earlier, because we can see that this is not just AI in some kind of mystic technological thing that is happening here. This is like really humans that are gathering information and enhancing technology to achieve better, faster, and um, and this is so fascinating. And the outcomes of those of this work and of all those people working together have such a great value for the world and for the local people. And I feel like this is some those are examples of use cases that are very important to remind, because we talk a lot about AI when we talk about like algorithms, recommendation algorithms, or like we know how the you mentioned algorithms of Netflix before. This is an example of AI, of course, but there are many others sectors where we can apply those. So thanks a lot for sharing these. Um, I would like to ask you, before asking you my three and end of the episode sections, I would like to ask you, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the technology industry today and tomorrow in the future, and how can we address those challenges?
Uh, the biggest challenges. I think that there is a specific set of challenges that regard to the technology use, right? um so understanding how, again, going back to the ethical and responsible use of technology, how we're collecting data, how we're utilizing that data, how we're ensuring that users understand how we're using their data, or how that data is being implemented into systems. I think right now there is a lot of vulnerabilities in terms of cybersecurity and regulations as well. I was seeing the interrogation from the US government towards the CEO of TikTok yesterday. And it's very important that we are actually making sure that the people that are representing us in government understand how technology works, right? There were some questions that I was like, I cannot believe this person's asking the CEO of TikTok if TikTok is connecting to the Wi-Fi. Like, they don't know how Wi-Fi works, right? So I think that there is a lot of challenges to be approached, but I also think that there is a lot of possibilities of using technology. And I do believe that we're going on a fast-paced environment. We've been going on a fast-paced uh, path in the last 20 to 30 years since the internet was launched. But I think that now we need to actually sit down and consider again, as I said, and making sure that we are understanding how we are playing a role, each of us, even though we are not engineers or technical people. We do have a role in how we're using the systems, what kind of feedback we're giving to those systems. And I think that one of the main challenges is that we continue to saying that it's going to be only like information or data or whatever technical stuff, but it also pertains to the social part of it, right? How are we getting more divided as a society in terms of politics? How are we getting more divided, and the economic breach is getting wider? So I think there's a lot of considerations to be taken into account, but I believe in the power of good technology and technology for impact.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That made me think also of yeah, it's going so fast that it is impossible to have like great studies that showcase the harm of new technology, and like for example, like the harm of like spending more than 4 hours on TikTok a day. It is very hard to measure it today, but maybe it is something very important. And in the upcoming years, we'll see more studies and understand better, and maybe we'll need to add a disclaimer why before using this application, or maybe you'll need to be under over, I don't know, whatever age. So but yeah, thank you so much for your vision and for all those recommendations. uh, if right now there's someone that is listening to you and is very inspired, I am personally very inspired by your career and what you are achieving on a daily basis. You have a website, if I'm
Thank
correct,
you.
where you showcase all your amazing projects. What tips, career wise, would you give to someone that is inspired by what you're doing and what you're doing in technology, working in these projects? Like, do you have some tips about like learning, getting informations, and growing?
Yeah, so I think that it's a double sided sword, this kind of question, because I feel like there's a lot of information out there, and we have to be very critical about where we're getting our information from, what kind of sources we're actually believing, in terms of where we're getting that information. So I think that just making sure that you are doing that analysis critically, and making sure that you're getting that information from the right sources. And not to say that there are that the right sources are the ones that I say, but the right sources for you and for what you believe in and for what your projects are. I think it's important. I think the advice I would give someone starting out in the industry is it's hard sometimes. I think it's complicated sometimes, but it's very fun. And I think that making sure that you are taking care of people that are working in the industry and understanding that you're working with other human beings, no matter where they're from, if they're from government, from a private entity, from a university, or from a social group, or from a multi-sectoral organization. Understanding that there is a person on the other side always helps, to make sure that you can get your point across, and just being very honest about it. I think that would be my biggest advice for anyone in the industry and in any industry, really. And yeah, I think that would be the message that I would like to share. People comes first.
Awesome, thank you. Two last questions, and my last question is about your message. So you kind of give us a vision, but for the people who are listening right now, if they want to know more about you, about what you've done, what you're working on, how can they reach out, connect, or see your work?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, if anybody wants to see more of the work that we're doing at Pete Policy Lab, to learn more about the projects that I've been a part of in my career, they can go to my website, which is luciatroches.com. I'm sure that my last name is a little bit complicated, but
I'll put it in the description.
yes, thank you. And yeah, the Pit Policy Lab's website is policylab.tech, and the CMinds website is cminds.co. And I think that we have all of the information there, really. There is a lot of insights, reports, different landing pages with the different projects we're working on. So, more than welcome to collaborate to anyone that is interested in it. We also have a really great network of consultants. So if you're interested, just send us an email. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
That's awesome. You kind of share your message, but do you have a final message for the List KI community?
A final message.
It can be personal, it
Um,
can be professional, it can be a mix, it can be.
a final message, I think it's keep true to yourself, and people are what matter. I think those are the two things that I live by. Just stick to your values and make sure that you are doing important work in the world, and that you are connecting with people that think different than you. I think that's one of the main things that I have tried to do in the past years as well. To learn that everybody is diverse, they might have different opinions, but everyone's opinion could be valid if we look at it from their point of view. So I think that would be it.
Well, thank you so much, Lucia, and I wish you a wonderful day, and I look forward to learning more from you in the future.
Thank you for the invitation. I really had fun answering your questions, and hopefully, this will be of service to someone.